Wherever you are on your leadership voyage, it starts here.
Hey, everybody. Good to be with you again. This is Jason Wick, your host of Leadership Voyage, the podcast dedicated to your pursuit of becoming a great leader. And I am honored and privileged to be with you again for another episode here in season 4. For those of you who are new to the show, thank you for listening. For those of you who've been around for a while, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Startyourvoyage@gmail.com. I'd love to hear feedback, input about the previous shows, previous guests, topics, any of the above. Also, feel free to suggest things that you might be interested in hearing about. I've been getting quite a few outreaches about ideas for the show. Some are good fits, some are not great fits, and that's okay. But thank you very much to those of you who have been reaching out with some thoughts. So today I am going to, it's an episode I'm excited about. I was getting excited to prepare for it as well. And it's kind of an interesting take of bringing a few different thoughts together around how bosses stress their employees out. And I'll give you a quick glimpse here as to how this came to be, how this episode started. And I highly recommend for any of you out there, just download the Harvard Business Review app. Go and download HBR, download it, and set your notifications to get the management tip of the day. Every day, I get a notification from the app, which basically has one or two sentences about the management tip of the day. And then you can tap that and go ahead and read in more detail a few paragraphs about a specific area. There's usually a citation at the bottom. But the added benefit of having the app is also they will have a push notification every once in a while about a particular article. And one came in for me, which was something like, 5 ways managers stress out their employees. And of course, that got my attention. So when I tapped it, it actually led to an old article from May of 2020, which if I don't know about you all, but personally, I actually hate flashing back to COVID. So I don't want to dwell on that piece of it, but just think of the context of uncertainty around all of us in May of 2020, a little over 5 years ago. And this is an article written for HBR called 5 Ways Leaders Accidentally Stress Out Their Employees. And I'm using this as the launching pad, using it as a framework to talk about a few things about how managers will um, stress their employees out, will unnecessarily get them worked up or create anxiety for them. And I think it's an important thing to talk about. The last couple of episodes of this show, I've been talking about the uncertainty that we face. Now, looking back, um, in the future, looking back on where we are today, maybe it will, maybe it won't be a big era of change. It's hard to know this. But there's the business volatility, there's the tariff topic, affects the stock market. There is AI. It's not a new thing, but I've mentioned it the last 2 episodes. The influence of private equity, growth goals that are perhaps unrealistic or unattainable for certain businesses. And there are all of these pressures. All the while, unemployment is pretty low, but white collar workers who are unemployed are having a hard time finding work. The job application process is evolving in front of our eyes. I've covered that. It doesn't necessarily seem to be an effective process. However, it's hard to say how much change this is in a short period of time in the big picture. But it made me think about This article of the 5 ways leaders accidentally stress out their employees made me think about the role of managers today and the change that they are facing, and that the employees who follow them are significantly influenced by the managers themselves. And it gets this kind of rock or a hard place situation where there are these exceptional business demands, these evolving dynamics where we're not going to hire people if AI can do it. And the middle manager is the one squeezed between strategy and contributors. And it's not a new dynamic, but they are the core element to having engaged employees. So naturally, these roles, the middle managers, are the ones who are going to have the biggest influence on how the organization operates. The executive team that puts together strategy cannot go do the jobs that the employees are being asked to do, or that AI is being asked to do. So, where does it leave us with the role of the manager and how important that is when they themselves are the biggest dropping cohort when it comes to engagement? I don't know if you all saw that in the 2025 Gallup State of the Workplace report, which came out April or May of 2025. Managers are the ones who are dropping the most. So that is going to have a cascade, a trickle down, a snowball, however you think about that, on employees. But it made me think about how important it is to talk about this idea that leaders so easily can accidentally create stress for their employees. And this article is 5 years old, but I wonder if it doesn't really matter because these ideas transcend. Humans don't evolve that much in 5 years, I hope. But here's the deal. The article says, and there's a link to this in the show notes, the article says that essentially leaders often overestimate their own skills. And that's why they don't realize the power they have over the employees. They think they're doing just fine quite often. I found that was interesting. A lot of the managers and leaders that I interact with, they seem to carry themselves with a level of humility. But I suppose that doesn't inherently mean that they don't think they're doing a good job. And so they tend to overestimate their performance and their skills, and they're not aware of how much power that they have over the employees. So, why are we talking about this on Leadership Voyage? It's not for me to bring this up to guilt leaders and managers into thinking they're not good at leading. It's actually to empower them and empower you all to realize the power you have to influence your employees. And with this article, maybe it'll help you avoid 5 traps. So that's the point of this discussion. Realize the power you have and embrace that in a positive way. Become more informed with some of these 5 accidental stressors. And then, as always, hopefully you can pick something that you might work on or help be or try to be more aware of. So we're going to go through the 5 things that are in this article, the 5 accidental stressors. But before I do that, I want to mention there was a show in season 2, episode 8, that covered a write-up by Tracy Brower about the emotional impact that managers have on employees. And it had a stat in that article that said 69% of employees, their direct manager, had the equivalent mental health impact of their partner. And I highlight that before we get to this list, just to remember that, yep, it's a big responsibility to be a manager. But the good news is, if you're making progress, if you're making strides, if you're taking steps, if you're showing those who follow you that you're aware of your leadership and you're trying to improve it, I genuinely believe that that is half the battle. That builds relationships, that the employees see that and understand that. And I want to make sure to highlight that as a positive. You, as a manager, have a tremendous power to help make the people around you's lives better. And that's fantastic. How often do we get that opportunity in people's lives? So that's a good thing. That's a great thing. So, from the HBR article, 5 ways leaders accidentally stress out their employees. Here we go. Number one, and the way the format's going to go here is I have a few that I'll expound upon, but the format is what is the issue, why does it matter, and then maybe I've got some extra supplemental info to add to it, but not in every case. So number one, avoid negative language. And a lot of these, when you look back at the list, you'll be like, okay, that seems pretty simple. But who knows how you're acting in the moment, talking to your team in a one-on-one, being reactive, responding to situations, team meetings, whatever it happens to be. So number one, avoid negative language. And the main reason for this is that it heightens employee anxiety. And this reminded me of a book called 3 Vital Questions: Transforming Workplace Drama. And I was in this leadership group for a few years called for a couple years called Dose of Leadership University, filled with a fantastic group of individuals from around the world, actually. And a subset of us still meet about every month or so. But when we were in this group, we were introduced to the concepts in this book, 3 Vital Questions: Transforming Workplace Drama by David Emerald, written in 2019. And what reminded me about this idea of avoid negative language was the distinction in this book between a problem orientation and an outcome orientation. And hang with me for a second. I want to highlight the difference between negative language and saying something in a different way. When you frame something as a problem, that usually leads to anxiety. And when people are anxious, their actions are reactive, which leads to a problem, right? And you're getting in this cycle. You're kind of stuck in this loop. When you have an outcome orientation, you're stating what's in front of us as something we want to achieve, as an outcome. Usually, when we have an outcome orientation, that leads to some kind of passion, some kind of inspiration with the folks who are involved. And that leads to a baby step of progress towards that outcome. And that starts building momentum in that direction for the positive. So I wanted to highlight that from this book because it reminded me of this, where if we avoid the negative language and we frame things in terms of outcomes, we are more likely to get good results from those who are following us. So the number one trap, or the first trap, avoid negative language. Let's see, number two here. I think I've got it. Okay. Number two is erratic actions. Erratic actions. Now, why is this an issue? Again, pretty self-explanatory. If you are consistent and predictable, people know what to expect. It's one less thing for them to have to worry about. Oh, great. Which side of the bed did my boss wake up today? Is he or she going to be excited or disappointed, even though I think we've done a good job, right? It adds stress to a situation that doesn't need it added to it when you come with erratic actions. And you can dive into this more deeply in the article if you go ahead and click and read it. Number 3, emotional volatility. And 3, 4, and 5 to me is where the meat of this discussion happens, at least from my point of view. So number 3 is kind of related to erratic actions, but emotional volatility. And it says here that leaders should do their best to bring their best poker face. Bring their best poker face. And I thought this was interesting because it is talking about hiding your emotions or hiding how you feel. And it made me wonder if that was slightly inauthentic. There's a difference between just being completely unfiltered, raw, and transparent. Apologies for the sniffles, by the way, just getting over a cold. Um, there's a difference between being entirely transparent and raw, uh, and then being honest, right? And so I will say this one struck me a little odd, but wear your poker face is what it suggests. And it said for folks who struggle with this, they suggest mindfulness. And I took a class back in May. It was an outdoor class at a place near me. Actually, it's where my wife works, the Gardens at Spring Creek in the city of Fort Collins, Colorado. It was a very cool class. It was called Forest Bathing, and it was essentially about the benefits of nature and how to be mindful in nature and having those experiences with other people. It was really cool. But something that the facilitator said to open up this course was how when you walk into a room and you have emotions, right, those are contagious one way or the other. And it's of course true. We all know that. And that's what perhaps is the point of this. Be aware that if you are emotionally volatile, be aware that how you end up showing up in any given situation is contagious and is going to affect your team. And if you think you're more likely to come up with a negative reaction based on your mood, circumstances, whatever's going on, maybe that's a place to think about the poker face. Take a deep breath, step into the situation, do your best to just stay flat while you read what's going on. Number 4 way to unintentionally stress your team out would be excessive pessimism. And this is very similar to the emotional volatility and the poker face. The suggestion in this article is even if you feel excessively pessimistic, don't project it. I find the way that this list kind of turned to be really fascinating. The author, bear in mind the context, we're talking about May of 2020, okay? The author is saying, even if you feel pessimistic, hide it because you don't need your team to feel that. And I find this one, again, really interesting to think about. You should think about this yourselves. Is that what you would prefer to do? And I think that's just something that we all have to think about. How honest and transparent do we all want to be with our teams in any given moment based on what the situation might be? And the 5th item here, which is where the dissonance really comes to a head for me. The 5th item on this list of how to avoid, or one way that you unintentionally stress your team out, is by ignoring people's emotions. So what is interesting here is they suggest that usually this happens when leaders are hyper-focused on their own emotions. And this is the one, excuse me, this is the one where my head explodes a little bit. All we're talking about in this list is ways to regulate our emotions. And then number 5 is pay attention to other emotions, which usually happens when you're paying too much attention to your own emotions, right? So I think the list is good to think about, maybe picking one thing off here that speaks to you. But when I kind of put it all together, it kind of makes me, it kind of doesn't land very well in my brain. And I'll tell you one thing that's really good in this article about this 5th section. It says, check on how people are doing, as opposed to just focusing on what they're doing. My co-founder with the business I've got, Sonia Burtek, who was a guest on this show a few episodes ago, she said something in a session we were doing last week for an organization. She said something, don't let the first time people hear from you this week be when you want something from them. I think that's a great guiding principle. I like that. You go, well, I thought of you, but only when I needed something from you. And similarly on this list, one way to help tap into people's emotions is to ask them, how are they doing? Not just what are they doing? So I think that's fantastic. And I'll take that as the number one takeaway for me personally from this write-up at HBR. Now, what's the dissonance of this? I already called out one. We need to watch out for being emotionally volatile. We need to watch out for being excessively pessimistic. But we can't just focus on our own emotions. We need to focus on everyone else's emotions. Sounds very difficult, right? Especially in the heat of the moment and whatever might be transpiring at work. So I think it's important to acknowledge that the combination of those three items on this list, I think, is extremely difficult to reconcile and really figure out. But hey, here's to aspiring to becoming better leaders, right? The last part I want to add to this conversation is I love, as I just said, I love the suggestion of focusing on how people are doing rather than what they are doing. But it brings me to an article that I read recently. And of course, somehow on my other computer that I'm looking at all my stuff, I'm not logged in anymore on this article. So give me a second here. I am now logged into my Wall Street Journal account. This is an article under the Lifestyle and Workplace section, May 11th, 2025. Author is Chip Cutter. And the title is, quote, Everybody's Replaceable. The New Ways Bosses Talk About Workers. And this is what I think is getting hard in this environment. 92% of HR leaders say that their people-centric initiatives are under attack. This article in the Wall Street Journal from May 11th says, everybody's replaceable. The new ways bosses talk about workers. Yet, for me, the most important takeaway from this list of the 5 ways you might accidentally stress your employees out is to ask how they're doing before you ask what they're doing. So we've got tension right now, folks, right? The leverage is on the side of businesses. But it's sad that we even need to talk about leverage, because what we're really trying to talk about, right, if we really zoom out, how can managers help execute the brilliant strategies of organizations by caring for the people who are doing the work, bringing them along and leveraging their creativity, and at the end of that road, seeing great results that make the world better. That's why we work. It's one of the 3 most meaningful things in people's lives is their work. And so when I saw this article, May 11th in the Wall Street Journal, with the key points that companies are demanding more from their employees amid the economic uncertainty and a shift in power dynamics, CEOs are taking a tough stance, expecting more work, less complaints, and advances in AI are influencing this tone, with some leaders warning staff to adapt or lose their jobs. It's not my business to tell someone how to run a company, right? I've never run a large company. I don't know. But it is a bummer to read about some of the trends, at least being covered on this level, about how people are looking at the employees in an organization, the people who do the work in an organization. So I ask you, managers, directors, VPs, those of you out there who hold these roles, who have people who follow you, try to think about these 5 traps. Try to think about which one you're more likely to fall into. And remember that if you're under pressure for great results, yep, the short-term first-order benefit of working hard is getting great results. But what about the second-order results? Right? What about what happens in 2 quarters or in 2 years when employees are being treated a certain way, or the tone towards the workforce is a certain way? Things come back around eventually, right? Scales shift left and right, and we want to just do what's a good by all of us, right? We want to do right, and we want to have fulfilling places to work, and we want to get great results. And if you want great results, treat your employees like humans. Bring them along, help them understand why we're doing it, and let them buy in, because then they'll be motivated, right? All right, folks. So, talked about how bosses unintentionally stress employees out, that list of 5 things. Remember how managers have a significant mental health impact over their employees. And we've got some of these shifting workplace dynamics that have been evolving in the last several months. And I do believe that through the managers, we can invigorate the workforce. We can bring the individuals along, help them see the vision, understand why the work is important, and treat fairly. Until next time, everybody take care.